So I believe my next guest is in the studio here. Renn is actually in town. Renn, thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
Last time we talked with the Urbanophile,
Oh, yes.
knowing of all things urban policy, we had you on Skype here, but now we've got you in person.
Right. Well, being on the live feed from Rhode Island, made me think I got to get back up there. So now that I live in New York, I can just take the train up and just here walking around downtown Providence. It's looking good.
We're trying. We made it look good just for you.
Yeah.
We're trying. What brought you back up this time around?
I'm going to be speaking at a conference in Boston, and then I just decided to spend some time visiting, catching up with some friends, checking out the city, seeing what's going on. If I'm going to be the Urbanophile, I got to check out what's actually going on in cities, and what's going on in Rhode Island. To have personal connections here, and just seeing what's up, staying in tune with what's going on.
So we had a great conversation just a few weeks back.
Right.
I always like seeing what you have on your blog about all things urban studies, and it's it's a kind of a think and do blog of what's going on. And there were a couple of things you wrote about that I wanted to pick your brain about.
Sure.
You did write a blog post about shrinking cities. Now I wouldn't say, but Providence does not fit in that category per se. I mean, we're maybe a little stagnant.
Yeah, I mean, Providence is down from kind of the peak population, which is true of most cities. But when we think of shrinking cities, we really think of places like Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis. The city of St. Louis went from 800 and something thousand people now to below 300,000.
That's a shrink.
More than half of the people gone from the peak in the city of Detroit. Now the regions have grown in those places in most cases, but the central cities have shrunk. You've probably seen the pictures of all of the urban prairie, they sometimes call it, of all of this, the abandoned vacant land. There's not a lot of abandonment as much that I see in Providence. As I recall, the housing stock's actually in pretty good shape. This city actually benefited because in the mid-century era, when there's a lot of what they called urban renewal, demolishing cities to build public housing projects or huge government office buildings like Boston City Hall or the freeways. So there was some damage done to Providence, but not nearly as much as happened to a lot of other cities.
Okay.
Some places like New Haven really got wiped out by urban renewal. So there's still a lot of intact urban fabric in the city. Now there's been some things that have definitely affected the city, like the 610 junction, for example, that's been in the news. Really cut through Olneyville.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it looks like they're basically going to rebuild it sort of as is, which is, personally disappointing to me. I would like to see them find a way to whack that thing and reconnect basically Providence together again, because there's really some prime potential redevelopment opportunities there.
So you follow that closely? Obviously.
Yeah, a little bit. That's one of the things that I saw. So that's one of the examples of damage that was done in the freeway construction era. But really, Detroit was carved up with freeways. Boston, they actually tore down their elevated freeway and built a big dig. Now that was kind of an economic catastrophe in a sense, but things look better when you have a huge freeway cutting through your city. But Providence really had a lot less of that than some other places, and a lot more of the history here. It's one of the oldest housing stocks in the country in Rhode Island, and old triple deckers and all kinds of interesting things that you really don't see in the Midwest where I'm from. The old mill architecture here I especially love. Just some incredible buildings. And so it's glad that a lot of that is intact, because those are the sorts of things you can never replace. You can never go back and rebuild something from the 20s or from the 1700s. You just can't get that back. We don't build cities like we used to. So it's like there's a fixed supply of it. When you destroy it, it's gone. And so luckily Providence has kept a lot of it in pretty good shape. And so I think it's tendency to concentrate on the negatives, but there's a lot that's left, which is good.
So speaking of keeping things of historical nature, or historical value, you might have seen that they're in the process of tearing down the Fogarty building across from the Civic Center. Now that was the big cement brutalist building. How does the role of brutalist architecture in cities around the country? Is there any sort of appreciation for them? Now they're putting a hotel there. There's need for hotels here. Some architects and kind of urban lovers did actually have a little funeral for it when they started demolition. Is there any love for brutalist architecture?
Well, the brutalist architecture is this kind of architecture. Brutalism really comes from a French term that means raw concrete. It's these mid-century big concrete hulking structures. And they were very unpopular. I don't know this particular building. I can't remember exactly what building you're referring to. A lot of them have really been out of favor. People want to demolish them. And they're sort of at that age where they're considered obsolete. They need to be, a lot of them, there's a lot of money to fix them up.
Yes.
But they haven't yet been fallen in love with them. Sort of how like a lot of the early 20th century architecture was in the 50s and 60s and 70s when a lot of it got demolished. It was old, but it wasn't historic.
Yes,
it's
in that
kind of range. So the question
limbo.
is, what will happen to a lot of this brutalist architecture? Some of it, in my view, it's hard. I'm a product of my times. I think a lot of it's terrible, and they had leaks. They had a lot of problems. Some of them are tastefully done. So I think we want to save the best, but we're not going to save everything.
No, when they started tearing down Fogarty, Go Local did take a look at other buildings around Providence that have the potential. The Science Center, the Science Library around that big, tall monstrosity that you can see from the highway.
Right.
Of course, a classic example of brutalist architecture, City Hall up in Boston. I mean, that's at a plaza. That almost, could be straight out of somewhere in Russia.
It's like the Ministry of Truth.
The Ministry of Truth. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you when you came in today is actually a little bit about Boston. And, there's always a lot of talk about how we're in a regional economy here, that we don't exist in a vacuum. So if we are in a regional economy, why do we continue to lag behind a Boston that has a gazillion cranes in the sky? We've got a couple down by the train station, anticipating more with 195. So why aren't we kind of lifted up like all rising boats in this regional economy to the level of a Boston?
Well, what we see is that even within these regions, there's just very highly fragmented. There's sort of a patchwork quilt of success and less success. Bill de Blasio was elected mayor of New York City on the idea that there were two New Yorks. There was the successful New York, and there was sort of the left behind people. We've really seen this two-tier economy. And so even within successful regions, you often have very, very prospering areas. Some that are sort of like in the middle, and others that are kind of doing very poorly. Boston doesn't have as much of the genuinely poor performing areas, like say Chicago does, with like this amazingly booming downtown economy and yet the murder capital of the US on the south side. So what we see is a lot of the economy today has been tech and things of that nature. And what we're seeing with tech and with life sciences, some of it is sort of re-centralizing into downtown areas. So there's been an amazing boom in construction in Cambridge and places like that as biotech companies have built millions of square feet of office space there. So really, Rhode Island is probably not just going to have like a sprawl situation where prosperity kind of rolls out of Boston. But how can you become a nodes? How can you create nodes within the state? It's probably not going to be the whole state. What are the nodes within the state that sort of sprout up and get connected as part of an archipelago, if you will, of success within the region? That's how I would think about it.
And one of the opportunities right behind us here on the 195 land is, of course, I'm sure you followed Wexford and having the Cambridge Innovation Centers. Talked about job creation there and talked about hundreds of chairs being full of innovators. Do you see it as a case of if you build it, they will come?
Well, the track record of if you build it and they will come type development is pretty porous. But I don't know about that kind of, that specific development I'm not familiar with, so I don't want to comment on it. It's hard to force the marketplace through some sort of a big government project or big kind of public-private partnership. There's the kind of really, the brutalist architecture was really reminiscent of the era when you had this big monolithic development that you were going to sort of redevelop everything with this one thing. Really, if you look at where's tech in New York City, it's happening in like Soho, it's happening in Lower Manhattan, where you have all the small, low-rise buildings jumbled together, diversity of uses. It's not about the big high-rise in the middle. So the thing that I
would a little more organic, if you will.
Right. So on the 195 land, you don't want to just have this thing be like a master plan. You don't want it to be like the Woodlands, Texas, or some master plan suburb. It's like a master plan community, like Irvine, California, or something like that. It's where Exxon's building their campus. Cities have to have a little more chaos, a little more multiple things going on. You want to be careful not to just overly treat it as like a mall, like a planned district.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the 195 Commission's approach. There's plots and there's vetting, and a lot of it's done under public scrutiny. Some of it's being done a little bit behind closed doors. Are they overplanning? Could there be any role of or sort of organic development, or do you need that because there's just such a finite amount of land in that small area, which is just a portion of the city? Is it sort of what they have to do?
Yeah, I haven't followed that in particular. I don't think it's any secret that where we're standing right now in this kind of down city arts district area is maybe the best part of Providence in a sense, because it's all these old buildings. Look at how this is built.
Look at us here. Look at the
And
studio.
look where we're
we
at.
put a studio right in an
You put
old building.
A movie studio in an old building. We got an internet startup and go local right here. This is the kind of company, this is the kind of development that is more, you've got people living in this district, you get entertainment in this district, but it wasn't something that somebody sat down and said, now we will put a TV studio here.
Now
So I think
goes here.
the attempt to kind of curate an economy is very tempting. We always think we can create the ingredients, but the truth of the matter is
Little SimCity-ish.
organic is always better if you can do it. And a lot of times there's tremendous political pressure on people in the government, like,
Yes.
oh, that empty land, you got to do something with the land, you fools. Well, better to let it sit empty and kind of land bank it than to go just do something to do something, is what I would say. You want to just, you don't want to like try to do things when the market's not there for it if you can. The private sector, companies like Go Local, those kind of companies are really what's going to be driving it.
That's what we're trying to do here. Now, I love having your sort of insider-outsider perspective because you lived here for a couple of years. Now you're back in New York. You know, here we are in Providence. You know, we pay close attention to issues. We can be, you know, very critical. What do you say Providence does well?
I think it's a very creative, legitimately, we talk about like a creative capital. I think it's one of these things where everybody claims to be a creative city today, and it's sort of true. The bar is higher than it used to be in terms of, maybe even the gap is not as big as it used to be, but I still say this is a place of genuinely high talent people. Yeah, I'd always meet interesting people here who had worked in London, in New York, worked in an ad agency in these cities. So these are people who were actually succeeding at the highest levels around the world in some sort of creative endeavor, and now they're here running a small business or wanting to be back close to home or wanted to be able to afford to buy a house, which you can't do in a lot of those places. Yes. And so I do think there really is a segment of elite talent here in terms of the creative sectors that's not present in a lot of cities.
And one of the things that we have talked about and continue to talk about, obviously, is the financial situation, the fiscal situation of the city with the pension obligation and the unfunded liability. You talk about cities that are shrinking, you talk about a Detroit. I mean, folks have consistently brought up the prospect of bankruptcy here. And I know that's not necessarily the issue that you focus on per se, but what would that mean to a Providence? I mean, is it something that should be on the table, and is it, something that folks should consider?
Well, being allowed to file a municipal bankruptcy is not that easy. It's not like a corporation when you sort of are a little bit, the structure's bad, you can sort of file bankruptcy. Well, you basically have to be physically unable to pay your bills. And so some places have tried to file and have been denied. I would say look at what happened in Central Falls. And look at that as a potential template of what it would look like. I haven't studied what a bankruptcy would look like in general, but you have to look at it. How much money in taxes can you raise? Can you potentially cover this thing? How do you restructure this thing at some level? It's fixing the structural finances has to be done, because right now it's just this huge cloud hanging over things, and until you get that kind of resolved, it's going to be challenging. Now, if you look at Detroit, you can argue that it worked okay there, and things have there's been a lot going on in Detroit. It's gotten a lot of more positive press, things going in, billionaires moving things in. If you look at the financial intervention in Flint, on the other hand, it was a debacle. So you really want to make sure that you don't just say, bankruptcy is just this easy. We'll just boom, we'll wipe out all these out-of-town bondholders, and we'll just walk away from this or whatever. No. Or these people on pensions are in Florida where they can't do anything anymore. Well, you can try, but you don't know. It's like you sort of lose control of the process a little bit when you go into bankruptcy. So it's a little uncertain.
It's one of the things that we're keeping an eye on here, and always picking your brain on issues. And I know one of the things that you're currently doing, you're asking folks to get in touch with you about just what they see are big issues facing cities. And when do you anticipate coming out with sort of that report or analysis of what folks get in touch with you about?
Well, I mean, I'll probably post something on my site, Urbanophile.com, with just what people told me. But I'm just looking what are the little things people are seeing out there that maybe I didn't see.
Okay.
Hey, you need to pay attention to X, you need to pay attention to Y. Here's kind of an emerging area. I actually was kind of on top of the election this year because, I grew up in the Midwest and kind of working class communities, and I saw the anger and what was going on in these places, and I drove through them, I saw them, and so I was kind of on top of that, but I want to make sure I don't miss the next story. I want to know what's going on. What's the thing that's going on in Rhode Island? Maybe it's not in Providence, maybe it's in West Warwick, maybe somewhere else that nobody's talking about that needs to be more investigated. I would be interested. Maybe aiming my research in that direction.
So you made that call to folks to get in touch with you about the things to look at. What else do you have on your plate research-wise? What do we expect to see from you in short or long order?
Well, I'm writing a major article on infrastructure. There's been a lot of talk about what the federal government should do about infrastructure.
Yes.
Trump has floated this $1 billion plan. So I'm going to be writing, it's about 6,000 words probably at the end of the day, on here's what we should do about infrastructure, which is the Cliff Notes version will be, we don't need to build some vast footprint of new infrastructure. We need to rebuild the infrastructure we already have, which is challenging. Politicians love to cut ribbons on new things.
Yes.
Changing the oil in the car, rotating the tires, doing the maintenance is not as sexy, so we have to make maintenance sexy again. And so
Make maintenance
that's
sexy
going
again.
to be one of the big things I'm working on.
Fantastic. And do you hope that ends up on the president's desks, on congressional desks, just something give people some food for thought?
I'm hoping so.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm sure we'll feature it here at Go Local. Aaron Renn, Urbanophile, here. You heading up to Boston tonight?
Not tonight.
Okay, sticking around Providence.
That's
yeah.
right.
What are your favorite hunts? Where are you going to be going out?
That's a good question. I'm going to be having drinks with somebody at the Eddy. I think
yes.
it's right around the corner here,
Yeah.
and then we'll see.
Off to the races. Well, there's no shortage of great options around here, so you must be happy to be back.
Right.
Wish you a very fun night, Aaron.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate your
Thanks for
coming
having me
in.
on.
We'll probably see you via Skype at some point.
All right,
okay.
Excellent. Maybe I'll have to come back again.
Yes, it doesn't take much to lure you back because you
Right.
do love this city.
Right. Got to get a wiener every now and again.
You gotta get the fix. You
Right.
gotta get your system.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Aaron Renn, Urbanophile. Thanks so much. That was Aaron Renn, the Urbanophile, who we last Skyped with. Now he's down in New York, but we had the opportunity to get a little insight into some of his research about urban issues. Weighed in a little bit about development here in Providence, his thoughts on 195 development, thoughts on organic versus top-down development approaches. So it'll be good to listen to him again and get his vantage point. But again, Urbanophile, if you love cities, all things cities, and actually I do know that Aaron actually came from a very rural area growing up, and he did have a very interesting article about where he sees things improving on the rural front. That was an interesting read as well. Wish I had the chance to have chatted with him, but hopefully next time we